systems go. Clear for liftoff.
Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy, GS Luke, here with our Round 3 live stream for the Rocket Classic. Going to get you guys ready for all of your showdown exposure with a look at any of your questions in the chat, a weather report as well, some strategy for Saturday's slate, and we'll wrap it all up with a little bit of contest selection and lineup construction as well. But hopefully the Friday is treating you guys nicely. Today's showdown slate ended up being a smash slate for yours truly. Of course, that weather edge ended up being the main thing that helped us out. On top of that, a really good player pool in that AM wave. So hopefully you guys were able to go out there and find some success in your own lineups. So we got Chris down there, Michael as well, Sites in the live chat early. You sweaty tryhards. Let's get after it for tomorrow. Any sort of questions that you've got, don't be shy at all to go ahead and fire them down below. Player pool deep dives, we're going to keep until a little bit later on. So about 15 minutes from now, we'll get to all of those. But yeah, don't be shy to say hi either. Smash a like button if you guys haven't already, and let's get this thing rocking. So first thing to note about the golf course today was the really big difference between the morning and afternoon. And play is still finishing up. In fact, the cut line is in sway between -6 and -7. But morning wave played about 1.4 strokes easier than the afternoon. So that was quite predictable with the weather forecast that we had, and ended up being really nice for our main slate exposure too, because that PM AM wave was the side that looked like it was going to get that advantage. In between the first few days, it was a 1.6 stroke advantage towards that side, which is one of the bigger weather edges that we've had for quite some time. It feels like for the last month and a half, 2 months, it's been a lot of flat weather slates. This time around, it really worked to those that correlated it. So a little bit of a pat on the back, I guess, for that. It was nice for our exposure today as well. And tomorrow, though, a lot of it's going to come down to tee times, because there could be a slight advantage to teeing off early tomorrow. But with the fact that it's looking like a -6 cut is the most likely outcome, a few guys kind of choked over the last few holes. So it looks like those guys might end up lucking out, because there's going to be like 80 something guys that make the cut if that's the case. And just to scroll down and double check on that, yeah, 86 players as of now that are at -6 or better. Rosner or Cummins could move that up to -7, but if it doesn't move, they're for sure going to have to use threesomes off of both tees, which means there would be little to no weather edge for Saturday's action. So I would say that if it happens to be twosomes, maybe one of those two makes a very unlikely birdie on that very difficult 9th hole. If they pull it off, you could take some of the first two groups out, but it would be a very small weather edge. It'd only be a few groups that'd be getting a slight advantage. And because it's not like there's defined waves like we had for today, also it's not like it picks up around noon like we had as well. It's much earlier into the day where that wind starts to kick up a bit. It's not going to be nearly as big of a weather slate. So unlike today where I only played guys that were on the AM side of things, tomorrow, especially if it is the threesomes off of both sides, there's going to be little to no weather that I'm using in my lineup. So more of a traditional slate where we're playing game theory, trying to get as much ownership leverage as possible, and then building a solid player pool around that end. Before we start talking about shots gained metrics, building a player pool, all of that sort of jazz, let's mention the ownership aspect, because just like round number 2, it's rather predictable when the chalk, when it comes, well, excuse me there. I need a sip of something. Jeez Louise, just trying to go too fast, huh? As I was trying to say before I completely fumbled that, the ownership is really congregated towards the top end of the board. So, for example, like your most popular spend ups are going to be your Hideki's, your Colin Morikawas as well, that are up there towards the top end of the board. And Luke Clanton will probably get some steam at Grazeman, just like round 2. Will probably be some of the more popular players in the 8, 9, and 10K range. And that's because of their current standing. You know, your casual PGA DFS players tend to think that the round before, the 2 rounds before, are completely indicative of how they're going to play the next day. And will there be a few guys up here that play well? Most likely, right? You're going to get a few that pop off for -4, -5 rounds. And those will be your players that are in contention to actually win this golf tournament. But also, a lot of these other guys towards the top end of the board are not going to find that kind of success. So in general, when I talk about playing that game theory edge and trying to get leverage into your lineups, I more so mean taking players towards the middle to the bottom end of the board. And, sometimes that could be because of a weather edge. For example, like if they are going out early tomorrow morning on those threesomes, like maybe the first three groups in the middle could be worth targeting, because the middle of the board will be the first three groups out if it is threesomes off of both sides. Just a little bit of a different tee time dynamic, of course, if they're doing the threesomes as opposed to the twosomes. But even if it's just the ownership angle, and I think that's really what we want to focus on for tomorrow's slate, these bottom end players that are just squeaking by the cut line are going to be significantly lower owned than their counterparts at the top. So, for example, and Patrick Cantlay, if he sneaks in at -6, a Kurt Kitayama, Akshay Bhatia, any of these players that seemingly aren't playing as good of golf as the guys towards the top, maybe their projection should be slightly lower because they're not in as good a form as those top tier guys. But it's not a drastic difference, right? You're talking about marginal differences with your guys that are in form versus your guys that are out of form. And if these players that are just squeaking by are going to be half as owned, maybe even a third of the ownership as some of the other players towards the top end of the board, then there's an argument to be made that this portion of the board, all of these players that are just making it through, are some of the best plays that you can find on the slate. And of course, there are a ton to choose from. I mean, just look at this. We have to scroll for a while just to get through all the T65s. You're going to have a lot of low-owned players to choose from, which means you don't have to pick them out of a hat, right? That's why we've got the shots gained metrics. That's why we can look at birdie or better percentage. We can look at course history players as well to try to round out that player pool. But the other component that we add on top of that for every single play that you should be considering would be this ownership angle, because the further and further up this leaderboard that we go, and when you start to get to these T23s or better, so your -10s on the scorecard or up, these sort of guys are going to be steamed to crap. And I would say especially like the 6 and 7K options, so like your Jackson Subers, your Phillip Knowles, like people that you would never see played in Showdown otherwise, will be like 2 to 3% owned at the very least. So like, for example, Kevin Roy could even be 5 to 7% owned. I think the best example would be like a Suber, normally like 0.3 to 0.5% owned on Showdown slates. He'll probably be at least 2% owned in a lot of GPPs for tomorrow. And, if he's typically 0.3 to 0.5% owned, I think that tells you a lot about the player's caliber and the kind of baseline that he has out here on tour. And that's why a lot of those guys are usually good fades. And, I think if you're going to make an exception for playing some chalk, it is usually a stud that you would do that with. So like perhaps your Harry Halls, Hideki's, Grazermans, Clantons, Morikawas, you get it, right? Your 9-10K players, maybe that's where you make that kind of exception, especially if the shots gained metrics look really good. And it's just something that you can't pass up based on how they played the first few rounds. But those players should be limited. A lot of these guys are going to be fades in my exposure, not players that I'm getting over the field on, unless it's just such a compelling stat profile that, like I said, I can't get off of them. So ownership projections on my site won't be published until later on, right? We still have the round going on and whatnot. Same thing on the SHIPIT Nation website. They're going to have ownership projections for all of you guys as well. Having a website like my Patreon or SHIPIT that has accurate, reliable ownership projections for these slates is also important to going out there and taking on one of these slates, because I would say picking a player pool, that's one half of the process. Arguably, the bigger half of the process and the more important half is the game theory angle, because golf's already a variant sport. It's very hard to predict. I mean, I don't think anyone thought Phillip Knowles would be a 36-hole leader. And didn't he chip in like 3 times for eagle today? What a legend. Look at that. Yeah, 3 chip-in eagles for Knowles. I believe had like 8 greens through like 15 holes. He had hit like half of his greens and he was still like -7, -8 or something. Just ridiculous stuff. Like there's a lot of variance clearly to the sport. Your Subers are up there. Like there's quite a few studs just behind. So after 72 holes, some of that variance is going to get ironed out. You will probably have a winner that we'd expect to see after 72 holes, at least most times you'd see at these kind of golf tournaments. But for an 18-hole sample, so just for tomorrow, right, it's extremely variant. It's just as variant as it has been for the first 2 rounds. So that's why even if these guys do project slightly better in some cases, it doesn't really mean that much at the end of the day, because it's such a variant sport that projection is really just a very small part of the puzzle. And you're going to have so many options towards the middle to the bottom end of the board that are usable that it's not that big a deal, in my opinion. And I do want to double check on this cut line sweat real quick. Looks like Rosner Cummins did not birdie that ninth. It's a really difficult hole, so I didn't think either one was going to pull it off. And there doesn't seem to be that many challengers left off to move it to that -7 mark. So it's looking like it's going to be an extremely large cut line, which kind of locks in the threesomes off of both sides. So weather edge, most likely not going to be a thing. And the reason I say that is because they're probably not going to start at 7 a.m. if it's threesomes off of both sides. They usually push it back so that the TV can have a more reasonable window for getting in like West Coast people to watch it. Because if they started at 7 a.m., your leaders are teeing off at 9. That's 6 a.m. Western time. Like, they're just not going to do that for the national TV coverage. So they'll probably start after the wind has already kicked up, which is why there's going to be little to no chance for any sort of a weather edge. So, I'm assuming that there's no theatrics that can go on with this cut line at this point. So let's lock in that -6 cut line for now, unless maybe somebody like signs an incorrect scorecard or something. I don't know. We've seen some weird stuff happen. Yeah, should be -6, it looks like. We're going to go through shots gained metrics now. So what I usually like to start with would be the shots gained ball striking, because one part of my process when it comes to finding players to use is trying to find guys that hit the ball well the day before. And the reason for that is that your golf swing, how you're actually swinging it, is the most consistent part of golf from round to round. Putting, you're around the green play, you're chipping. A lot of that comes down to luck and actually holding stuff. Some of it could be the imperfections on the greens, misreads from one day to the next. The part of golf that players have a lot more control over and that you'll see more consistency with is their off the tee play and approach. And when you add those two categories together, we call that category shots gained ball striking. So that's what the SGBS stands for right here. And I've got it for round number 2. And you know, there's going to be some chalk that shows up here, because if you shoot something like Jake Knapp did today, you've got to at least gain like a few strokes ball striking. For him, it was about 3.5 strokes, and he gained in those categories. Short game, though, was the bigger aspect for him. He actually gained about 5 strokes between the around the green and the putting, which is nice. It's a nice bonus. Usually need that to have around like -11. However, it's very unreliable. Jake would probably even tell you himself that he's very unlikely to make as many putts to chip in like he did today again. So if he's going to shoot something low, and I mean, -11 is just not possible. You're not going to see that from guys in back-to-back rounds. But if he wants to get to even like -6, -7 again, it's going to have to be another strong ball striking performance, which luckily for him, he was able to pull off today. So, you know, it's not like the short game stats are a big enough red flag that it overtakes this. But with some players, it could, right? Because if you gained all these strokes short game, but the ball striking was more pedestrian. In fact, maybe even lost strokes in the ball striking stats. That happens a lot, where somebody like loses like half a stroke to a stroke ball striking, but then gains 4 or 5 strokes short game and then shoots something low. Those kind of guys are like the biggest walking red flag imaginable. So the players that I like, there's going to be chalk up there, as I'm saying, are the ones that are a little bit further down the board, though. So like Thomas Rosenmuller, he's not a household name, so you know, maybe not my favorite play for tomorrow, but like your Nikolai Højgaards, your Joe Highsmiths, players that we see playing a lot more often, higher tier players, they're not going to be chalky either. Like Nico will be getting a little bit more ownership, I'd say, than a Joe Highsmith, but Highsmith in the 6K range and at T50, you're looking at, I'd say, sub 5% ownership on Highsmith, which, considering that he gained 3.6 strokes ball striking today and had that low round despite really doing nothing with the short game categories, this is the kind of stat profile that I love to see. And look at that. It was 2 eagles for Highsmith. So, and it's not like he chipped in for those eagles. Those were eagles where he hit the fairway, he hit the green in under regulation, and then made the putt. So I really like how he's getting the ball around the golf course. And because he's not going to be getting all that ownership, he makes a lot of sense from the game theory angle too. These guys at -6, there's a lot of them that I like for tomorrow. And I thought they were going to miss the cut before we got on live stream there, but then we had a lot happen over that last 10 minutes. And then now, of course, right, it looks like -6 is going to be the number. With that being said, though, like Davis Riley, he gained a bunch of strokes putting today. So I don't love that for him, but it is nice to see that he gained 3 strokes on approach. The players that were really catching my eye that were at T65, though, like in Eckroat, he gained 3.5 strokes on approach, but he was about neutral between the two short game categories. So that feels like a decent bounce back spot. Patrick Cantlay is like the best shots gained profile that we've seen all event at this point. 2.3 shots gained approach and lost over 4.5 strokes short game. I mean, Cantlay is normally a pretty good short game player. Like, he's not the best on tour or anything, but he's normally like a half a strokes gained per round between the short game categories. And he lost over 4 today. And just to give you guys an example of how variant the short game categories can be, let's look at Morikawa round 1. You may remember he was last in the field in shots gained putting. He lost 4.6 strokes. Today, he gained 3 strokes in the greens. So a Cantlay, right, who's normally a lot better on the greens, could be a really good spot for a bounce back. So you'll see guys like Cantlay in my player pool, especially if he's making the cut on the number. That's going to mean that he'll be one of the lower owned options towards the top end of the board. Ryan Gerard lost strokes putting despite gaining ball striking today. And you can see I'm not really focusing as much at these guys in the top 5, top 10, right? Reason for that is that they're going to be a lot of your higher owned players. So like a Thurston Lawrence, a Colin Morikawa is likely going to be by far the highest owned player towards the top end of the board. Like even a Chris Kirk with his course history as well. Like you're going to see those guys getting a lot of attention from the masses. The players that I think are sneakier and are better GPP plays in particular, because those are the contests where we need to be getting as much ownership leverage as we can. It would be like your Batias, your Davis Thompsons, both of these guys, right? That lost strokes with the shots gained putting. Those are the kind of candidates that you'll see me adding to the player pool. And on top of this ball striking, right, we've kind of already hinted at the short game stats, but putting around the green tends to be extremely variant. So guys that gained a whole bunch of strokes in these two categories are normally really good spots to fade for the next day. So for example, a Knapp we already mentioned, but a Ben Silverman, a Chan Kim, Jackson Suber, David Skins, Rosner, all of these players that you see well into the dark green with their putting, it's going to be hard to back that up in back-to-back days. And there can still be plays that you use that gained a whole bunch putting, but don't make them like the chalk at the top end of the board. If you're talking about like a guy starting in the top 5, top 10, one of the higher owned players on the slate being short game dependent, then that is just, in my opinion, a very bad play. Like it might work out for you once in a blue moon where he happens to turn it around the next day and pay off at that super high ownership. But if you're going to use somebody, right, that gained a whole bunch of strokes putting, maybe make it a 6K guy that isn't getting that much ownership anyways. Like, sure, you might be higher owned than he typically is, but is still around like 1.5% owned. Those kind of guys, you could get away with it because you're not going to get into that much trouble playing chalk towards the bottom, like especially 6K chalk that's like 2-3% owned at that portion of the board. But you do get into trouble when it's guys towards the top. And it's not just the putting, but also around the green. Philip Knowles gained 5 strokes around the green. 3 Eagles will do that for you, though. Webb Simpson, too, he chipped in twice today. That's 3.7 strokes around the green. These sort of players, and especially the ones that gained across both short game categories. So you can see Andrew Putnam, he gained over 2.5 in both categories. Your Doug Gims of the world, your Chad Ramey's, Ben Silverman's. Shout out to him too, right? He gained 1.5 strokes around the green. That is going to be extremely hard to reproduce in back-to-back days. So you can find some of your fades by looking at the short game categories, but you can also look at guys that lost a whole bunch of strokes on the greens for a little bit of bounce back regression too. And, you know, a lot of these guys are going to end up missing the cuts, especially when you lose that many strokes in a single round. But Cantlay, we already mentioned him as a potential bounce back candidate. Let's find a few more. And a lot of them are going to be missing the weekend, but Ventura, like he wasn't terrible elsewhere. He did gain tee to green and then lose 2.5 strokes putting. That feels like something that's not going to happen all that often. Minwoo Lee is another great case example. Today, he just couldn't get anything to drop. Round 1, though, he gained over 4 strokes in the short game categories. And, you know, we talked about it yesterday, right? That he was probably going to come crashing back down to earth. Well, that's what ended up happening to him. But now the opposite's true. He lost about 2.5 strokes in those two categories, and he could be primed for a little bit of a bounce back spot. So that's how I use the shots gained metrics to my advantage. It's never the end all be all. It's just one part of the process. And it's not the only way that I'm building my player pool for tomorrow. We've got ball striking poppers I'll be getting to, some of those short game regression candidates. That's another way that I get to my player pool for any given round. But I also go to high upside players, so people that make a whole bunch of birdies. An example of those sort of guys, if you just go to the stats tab, scoring, and then down to birdie or better percentage, these sort of players that are towards the top end of the list are always worth a few extra ads on Showdown, especially if they're low owned. Harry Hall is on that list, but he's not going to be low owned. But he's still playable. Like I said, that chalk is usable in spots, especially in that 9 and 10K range. But when we scroll down a little bit further, Jesper Svensson, I believe, is going to miss the cut if he happens to sneak in with a birdie on his last hole. Right? He's the number 7 birdie maker on tour, so that could be one to keep an eye out for. I'm not sure if Danny Walker is making the weekend. I don't think he is, but he's number 9, would be another kind of player that could pop on a showdown slate. Isaiah Salinda, I believe he's -6, so maybe Salinda is going to make the weekend. But like your Cantlays, your Eric Van Royens, a lot of these guys that outscore their actual positioning on the leaderboard. And what I mean by outscoring their positioning is that maybe they finish in like 30th on the actual leaderboard at the end of the week, but they're in DraftKings scoring. Some players, they might finish T30 but end up top 10 in the DraftKings scoring because of how many actual birdies they're posting. And for Showdowns, the same thing. We don't care about placement points at all in Showdown, in fact, so it's even more important to try and take a look at these players that are more aggressive. So that's another thing I add on top of the ball striking and some of the short game regression, but then also course history, players that play well around this sort of golf course. We've seen it for 5 years at this point, so we have a pretty good sample size of what plays well around this kind of a track. So those are the things that I'm looking for in my player pool. A little bit of a recap of some of the shots gained metrics as well. And now let's go through any sort of player pool deep dives that you've got for me in the chat. So by the way, if there's anyone we didn't touch on that you're curious about, now's the time to go ahead and let me know in the chat so we can deep dive that together. And then we're going to go through some strategy afterwards. So smash the like button if you guys haven't already. See, we've got 37 sweaty tryhards in the live chat. Let's pump up those numbers a little bit. You see cut line moving to -6 wasn't ideal for some, it looks like. But yeah, I'd say for Showdown 2, it's not ideal, but it does make it interesting. You're going to get a lot of variance over the next few days. Do we think when the scoring is easier that weather edges can have more of an impact? I don't think that the scoring really has that much of an impact on it. But yeah, today it was a pretty big difference. So that would be one nod towards that kind of a theory. But sometimes at the major championships, when we get a weather edge, there can be an even bigger difference. Like we've seen like 2.5 3-stroke differences before at hard golf courses. So I think it depends on where you're at. I don't know if we can really make a generalized statement about course difficulty and how it impacts that. What's going on? Kurt Walks, welcome on in. And that is 22 more players, man. It's a whole bunch more that are making their way in. Do I ever play the weekend only slate? Does that kill edges with the only 2 rounds to be played? So I don't ever play weekend only slates. And I'm not sure what kind of edge you're talking about. Maybe the weather edge is what you're mentioning. If that's the case, then yeah, it at least kind of takes away from it because you're not going to know about the Sunday tee times. The Sunday weather is going to be really hard to predict. I would say, though, you could make like some slight leans, though, because you do have 1 round figured out. So it's not something that you would have to completely ignore. But yeah, it means a little bit less if you're talking about the weather. You're just here to talk about David Skins. Yeah, good call, Nick. I know you played him in a few lineups. What about a Rosenmuller deep dive? So yeah, we kind of did it before, right? Because he was showing up on the ball striking list. I mean, from the stat perspective, I would say 7 out of 10. At least in that sort of vacuum, but we would be remiss not to mention that it's Thomas Rosenmuller and he's a lower tier player for a reason. So I try not to get sucked in too much when it's these guys that I have little to no confidence in. But if you're going to take a shot on a low owned 6K guy, I like Rosenmuller more than like 95% of the other options. So hopefully a few of you throw him into lineups just in case. They don't call him can't play for nothing. Amen to that. Will Gordon is so happy right now. I'm sure he is, man. That was a compelling story to say the least towards the end. I was rooting for him quite hard because you could see he was really battling it his last 2 holes. The birdie at 17 was rock. I mean, he had to make a 7-8 footer and he looked like it was a no doubter. And then the last hole, that putt, I mean, you could tell he was nervous. He was bouncing around that putter like crazy, but he made it. So it's good to him, man. A lot of people crumble under that pressure and he didn't. So if he ends up keeping his card and like earning full status again, maybe that could spark something going for him going forward. Because I would say that pressure of those last 2 holes was more than trying to win a golf tournament. I mean, that was playing for your dream, your livelihood. I mean, there's a lot of pressure playing for your job, right? You're making money, that sort of thing. There's some sort of pressure there. There's more pressure, in my opinion, when you're playing for your dream and your aspirations and everything that you've worked for in your life. And you could see that in his interview afterwards. So yeah, really happy for him, man. That was maybe annoying to some because of the higher 6 of 6 rate, but from the person perspective, got to feel good for Will Gordon for sure. You're here late, but you made it at last. Hey, better late than never. Welcome on in, man. He said, is Cam Young shooting 59 tomorrow so he can blow the overnight lead? That'd be pretty on brand, huh? If he went out there, got the lead, and then kind of choked on Sunday. But I don't know, 59 feels like a stretch if they don't have lift clean in place. But low round for sure could be in the cards. 6 of 6 is at 15 to 20%. Yep, sounds about right. Knapp said he did nothing different from yesterday on the greens. The putts were just falling this time. And yeah, that's the crazy thing, right? Because if we bring up the stats, I mean, I played him today. I was really glad to have him in lineups. He was obviously by far the best play I had because he was the best play on the slate. So it would be hard for him not to be. But yeah, he lost 3 strokes putting, and then today he gained over 4 strokes. That's a 7-stroke difference from day to day. I mean, just ridiculous stuff. And he did nothing different from round to round. I mean, Morikawa had a similar type of shift. Maybe Minwoo Lee can get it to go the other direction. And I haven't built my player pool yet, but Minwoo Lee is definitely going to be in there. Saturday Keegs, good point. Keegan made it through the weekend as well. A lot of the 10K guys like Cantlay, Keegan making the cut are why the 6 of 6 rate is just going to be all jacked up this week. Can we deep dive Davis Thompson and or Lee Hodges? For sure. And yeah, I'll always mention ownership with these plays too, because it's important, right? It's half the process when it comes to getting to these players. Lee Hodges, ownership's going to be inflated a bit. He's T8. He's also a ball striking popper. He gained about 2 strokes in the ball striking categories. I would say, he's a good play from the stat perspective. He's like a 6.5, a 7 out of 10, but the ownership being inflated 1.5 to probably 2 times where he would typically be at. I don't have an exact number now because I haven't ran my projections quite yet as the round is still finishing up. But yeah, Hodges, I'd imagine probably close to like 7 to 10% owned, way higher than main slate and way higher owns than he was for round 2 showdown. So even though the stat profile is a little bit better than most, I would say that probably takes away all of that, in my opinion. Like these guys like being in the 6-7K range, like especially ones like Hodges, like the bottom end of the 6K guys, like seriously, like bottom end, like $6,100, $6,200 guys are probably only going to get like 2-3% ownership when they're chalk. But when you're a Hodges that's a little bit further up in that pricing, he could be closer to that 7, 8, maybe 10% mark in some GPPs. So it does take away from it a bit. And then the other one was Davis Thompson, which we did show the stats on rather quickly before. Ball striking metrics looked great today. He gained off the tee, he gained on approach, and lost about 3 strokes putting. This kind of stat profile is, I'd say, even better because he's the ball striking popper and he's a short game regression candidate and he's a course history player, right? He finished in 2nd at this event last year. I mean, just a lot of things coming together for Davis Thompson. And the reason why he's so much of a better play compared to some of those guys starting in the top 10 is he's T36. He's not going to be unowned because a lot of people will look at the shots gained. They'll look at the course history, right? There are going to be people that click him into lineups too, but he's not going to be mega chalk at that portion of the board. So yeah, love myself some Davis Thompson, man. And hopefully the ownership stays in check. If we can get him at sub 15%, I'm going to feel pretty good about that. Cantlay season for round 3. I'm thinking so. Gaining off the tee and on approach and then losing short game, at least with the stats, a lot of regression that could be coming. Jake, take a nap. I like the pun there, man. Welcome on in. Nice to see you, Mr. Pepe. That's a great point. Might be freed up. I forget who that was talking about, but yeah, there's a lot of truth to getting freed up after the cut line. Piot diving, yeah, it was Gordon, right? Just going back to what I was saying. Yeah, maybe it could free him up a bit. It's only that when you put yourself in a really nasty hole, put yourself in a corner, and I could say this from experience, and I don't want to toot my own horn too much here, but I consider myself to have a clutch gene, and everything that I've done, whether it's school, like sometimes I would coast in school, especially in like high school, not really try until like the last month or two. And then I would just ace all my finals, ace all my final projects and get straight A's. There's that clutch gene, and some of it's because of laziness. Procrastinators are, infamous for being able to pull that off. But somebody like Will Gordon, you put yourself in that kind of situation, then you prove you can do it. It gives you a lot of confidence, right? And sometimes it could be misguided confidence because, like in my case, it was like, oh, okay, next semester I could do the same thing. It's not always a great thing, right? But for a golfer, it is a great thing because now he knows, hey, I need to make 2 birdies to make a cut next time. I've done that before. I need to make 2 birdies to win this golf tournament. I can do that because I just saved my career by being able to do that. So it means a whole lot. And yeah, it could free him up for sure. The PO dive or Piot dive, never really sure how to say his last name. He used to play on the Live Tour, of course. He lost strokes in the ball striking categories and gained 3 strokes putting. Yeah, no thank you. That's going to be a no from me, especially when it's like some 6K unknown player. I'm not going to do it when it's been all in the short game. Round 1, let's take the deep dive at that, though. It was a little bit of ball striking, and then he lost in the short game categories. So round 1 stat profile wasn't that bad. It was just really round 2 where he was so short game dependent. Still probably a no thank you, though. I can't get there when the stat profile is that ugly. What are my thoughts on Potgater? I mean, love how he started this week. Played him in main slate, so I tried to take advantage that way. But in Showdown, just like Hodges, who's at T8, he's going to get a lot more steam than he probably should. So he's not going to be as chalky as today's Showdown slate. Today's Showdown slate, he was one of the most popular players towards the bottom end of the board. Maybe he'll be closer to like 7, 8, maybe 9% ownership for round number 3 Showdown. Still higher owned than a lot of his peers. So that's kind of unfortunate for Potgater ownership, but it's I don't know. He's a decent play. Like, I don't want to say he's terrible because I bet him the top 5, top 10 this week for a reason. I obviously think he fits this golf course quite well. I just don't think that round 3 Showdown is the best place to get that exposure. So personally, I'm going to be fading him in my lineups. I'm not going to be using him because of that inflated ownership. And that is an easier thing to do when you have all that main slate exposure. But I would say even if you didn't play him for main slate, even if you didn't have like the placement bets that I do, I would still say that he's still not the best play because the shots gained metrics, you can see them right here to the right. He lost strokes across the board except for the putter today, and he's going to be higher owned. So, in a vacuum, he's probably like a 4 out of 10 play because the stat profile isn't great. Thoughts on the EVR ownership? So EVR's ownership should not be very high. If memory serves me correctly, he's right on the cut line. So his ownership would be average to below average ownership. Can't give you an exact number because I haven't ran my projections myself. But for that portion of the board, that's probably around 4 to 5%, I'd imagine, at the very most. So leverage, very easy to get on an Eric Van Rooyen if you're playing with a portfolio of like 20 to 150 lineups. If you're playing in a single entry, of course, 5% ownership would give you a whole bunch of leverage against the rest of the field there. Just booked a plane ticket to Detroit. Mitchell better be there. Yeah, give him the business, yo. That would be I'd pay to see that though, because I think he can hold his own. He seems like a pretty big dude. I haven't seen you though. Yeah, you might be able to take him to town for all I could know, right? What's going on, Aaron? He said, will Griffin ownership be above or below the main slate ownership? That's a tough one for me. I would say above it, and it's partially because of the cut line, right? Not having as many guys towards the top end of the pricing. I would have said for sure higher owned than his main slate exposure if you had Cantlay missing the cut, that -7 cut line happening. I know Keegan Bradley missing it too, but because those two are sneaking through, I think it's going to be about the same, I'd say. So probably about like that 25 to 30% mark is where he'll come in for tomorrow. But all right, let's go through some strategy stuff now. So in terms of contest selection, it's a little bit better than round 2. So I don't know what they did in round 2. The contests were just absolute crap. They're still not great, but the long drive is $5,000 bigger. So it's more what we're accustomed to seeing with 15% to first place, as opposed to the 20% that we saw for round 2. So my exposure, I'll probably be able to play a few more lineups this time around because the contests are a little bit more manageable. And just want to make sure we can get to all these. So this one is a 7th to first place. This is the $5 drive the green, $5 150 max. A 7th to first place is one of the better payout structures that we'll find. Let's find the Albatross. Let's also find the $12 GPP as well. Let's see. So here's the Albatross. This one is 12% to first. So that's a pretty decent payout structure. And then let's find that $33 dogleg as well. And this one is a 6th to first place. So a little bit better than what we had for round 2, where all of these single entries were like a 5th to first place. And they were just some of the worst contests that we've seen for a while. These payout structures are a little bit better just because we have more money to go around. So DraftKings, don't ever give us contests like we got for round 2. It was almost like they thought it was a DP World Tour slate or something. And as such, I kind of scaled back my exposure, which stinks because I had a massive day in terms of my ROI. I really wish I would have pushed more chips into the pile because I would have ended up making more money, but the contests just weren't there for me. And, a big part of this is, ownership. Building a player pool is a big cornerstone of a good showdown process, but also entering the right sort of contests. If you're entering contests that are 30% to first place, they weren't that bad yesterday, but some of them are pretty close to it. They were like 25% to first place. You're doing that too often, you're going to have to hit the absolute nuts to have positive ROI, and only so many people can get the absolute nuts and finish in first place in some of those big GPPs. So that's the problem with having to top heavy of a payout structure. And it's why, diving through and looking at the payout structures before you reserve your entries is such a key in PGA DFS. And then the other key is actually putting together your lineups, which for our sake, a lot of this is going to come down to making sure that we're getting enough leverage into our builds. And because we have some legit options up top that just made it through the cut line, I think it's going to be pretty easy to get highly leveraged lineups. So, for example, I could see myself starting, with Cantlay with his shots gained profile quite a bit. It's throwing a Cam Young there with his course history too. At a T49, he's not going to be overly popular. We could throw into Davis Thompson. We already know that his stat profile looked pretty sweet. And the weather's not a big deal. So, right, we're not really worrying about when these guys are teeing off because it's looking like it's going to be threesomes off of both tees. So going to be little to no advantage from that perspective. Let's see. In the 7K range, you could use a Højgaard who will be a little bit higher owned. We could go to where was he at? Lee Hodges here at $7,500, who's also going to get some ownership if we wanted to in this kind of lineup, because we've already leveraged ourselves with a Cam Young and a Davis Thompson. But the lineups that I prefer entering in large scale GPPs are almost pivots across the board. So I would kind of side towards an Olesen in that range, just to try and further force my hand and further get different to the field. And Matt Wallace had a pretty good stat profile today. He gained ball striking, lost strokes short game. At T36, he also won't be that popular. So even if we went with the most popular option we possibly could at $7,100, that would most likely be Jacob Bridgman at -11. So even if we did that to round off our 6 players, we would get away with that regardless of what contest you enter. Big $5, big $25 GBP, because we've gone different with pretty much every spot that we've taken so far. But just like the last few value plays I've gone through, I side towards trying to get a little bit more differentiation. So rather than a Bridgman, who is going to be in my player pool, I really like how Bridgman's been hitting the ball the first few days. But an Eric Van Rooyen, if I'm really trying to get a leveraged lineup, Eric Van Rooyen would be one of the preferred options I'd be taking maybe instead of a Jacob Bridgman. And, maybe it'll be in the single entries, some of my smaller field exposure where I play a Bridgman where I don't have to have nearly as much leverage. But when I'm trying to beat 10 to 20,000 entries like you have in the big $5 or $25, every little piece of leverage that you can squeeze into a lineup counts. And it's because of how variant the sport is. I mentioned before, it's very hard to predict on 18-hole sample size what's going to happen on golf. It's hard enough over 72 holes to pull that off, but even more so when we only have one round to work with. So my main piece of advice for the slate would be to play the game theory edge, get different, embrace the chaos as much as humanly possible. Building a player pool is important. Having a process for doing so is always going to be a big part of it. But the bigger part of it, in my opinion, is having those accurate ownership projections. So whether it's joining a site like SHIPIT Nation, like we have here, or my Patreon page, where you can find that on my Twitter/X bio, having a membership to a site like that, preferably both, so that you can have even better, even more reliable projections, being able to bounce it off both sites, is the main key to taking down a slate like tomorrow. Because without the placement points, knowing where the field is going to come in is arguably the biggest sort of edge that you can generate. So that's all I've got for round 3, guys. Best of luck with all the exposure that you're getting to. I'm going to see if there's any last second questions or player pool deep dives that you guys have for me in the live chat. But if not, I hope to see you guys at the top end of some of those GPPs. I'll probably have a 150 max in that $5 GPP. The payout structure looks good enough. I only went with 50 today, so I didn't really put my full exposure in there. And then a lot of those single entries, like that $100 single entry, you're definitely going to see me in there. Probably even both of those $100 single entries that we see posted for tomorrow. And then depending on the player pool, I'm still going to build my player pool, still have to finalize my projections, see how confident I'm feeling, but might even add some $250 for max exposure on top of that as well. So hopefully I can take down a contest or two. You guys can finish in second, third, fourth behind me. Good luck, but not too good of luck, because I still got to beat some of you guys in those contests, and let's have ourselves a moving day. So let's see. Anything in chat to go over before we wrap this thing up? You said how many pivots are needed in a single entry? So at least 2, I would say. you don't want six, you don't want 5 pieces of chalk in a single entry lineup. So at least 2, but 2 to 6, you could go 6 across the board if you like pivots enough. By pivots, I just mean somebody that's average to below average ownership. If you have 6 pivots that you like as conviction plays and they're just not getting the love, you could use 6 pivots in a single entry. It's just that you probably don't have to. So yeah, 2+. You said 2x money today, and you said you were top 20 in the single entry. You'll get that right on Showdown. Gosh, that was a mouthful, Nick. And I get what you're saying there, man. Yeah, you had it close today. You only had one player that kind of stunk your lineup up. You liked Velo today, and you're thinking about him tomorrow. I haven't seen Velo all week. So, yeah, super under the radar play. He's T23, so respect on his name. Shot -6. Good call, by the way. He definitely paid off that price tag if you used him in your Showdown lineups. Stat-wise, very average across the board. Can't really take that much away from the stat profile. But I would say that, if he's one of your losers down low that you want to throw into lineups, then commit to him, right? Because he's going to be low owned. He's probably going to be about 1% owned at the very most for round 3 Showdown. So even if you only throw him in like 7 to 10% of your lineups, maybe like 10 to 20%, if you really want to commit to him, you're going to have infinite leverage pretty much to the rest of the field. So yeah, I don't think I'm going to be joining you there, but that would be a heck of a hot take if you could do it in back-to-back rounds. And Steve Floyd was able to get 7x today. That's what happens when we listen to Luke. Amen, man. Just that's all. I don't even gotta say it myself, right? I got the chat helping me out there. So that's all I've got, guys. So best of luck with your round 3 exposure. Make sure to check out the SHIPIT Nation website for the stone and the projections later on, as well as for the round 4 live stream tomorrow evening. We're going to be doing the same thing for Sunday's action. So make sure you subscribe so you guys don't miss any of that when it drops. And also, guys, at 9 p.m. Eastern time on my YouTube channel tonight, I'm going to be doing a prop and betting live stream for moving day. So that'll be for sites like Prize Picks and Underdog, also on the sports books with matchup bets, covering conditions, weather for tomorrow, pin locations as well. I'll give you guys an idea of exactly how to attack your betting exposure. Make sure to check out that live stream. Again, that's in about an hour and 15 minutes at 9 p.m. Eastern time, and that will be on my YouTube channel. So make sure to subscribe over there. Stay tuned for that a little bit later on, and let's have ourselves a slate tomorrow, guys.